Greetings, everyone. It is GleeCon, and I am back with you again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we ran through, we actually, partly running, partly flying around the world. We just basically did some fetch quests and running around the Red Ridge Mountains. We actually didn't run around Red Ridge very much at all. We ran to Stormwind, to Westfall, to Duskwood, Goldshire, Elven Forest, just ran around picking up alcohol and dropping some other things off, picking up letters, getting horseshoes, just all kinds of random things. That took up a whole hour plus. And we also talked about the quests, the couple quests that we had done off screen, just dipping into the lake of Lakeshire and fighting some gnolls. So we've also been reading the Alliance Player's Guide, the Dungeons & Dragons campaign source book for the Alliance, and we're in the chapter 6, the biggest chapter, which is all about the history and culture of the various races and factions in the Alliance, and we read about the human history. And we've read that history so many times, it was through a slightly different lens. The same but different. Different but the same. Stay a while and listen now as we continue this with Dwarven history, but we're going to break it down into two parts just like we did with the elves, and this one's going to be Ironforge Dwarf history. Here we go. Ironforge, my very own kind. Finally a chance to talk about my own blood and kin. I'm a tad nervous about talking about the dwarves, though. It feels wrong, in a way. I can talk about everybody else all I want, but my own people feels a bit like gossip. Anyway, you may find this strange, but the dwarves don't know a lot about our own kind. Yeah, I admit it. We don't. Why do you think there's so many explorers like me out there? We're trying to learn more about ourselves, and we're finding out more every day. Here. Let me fill you in on what I do know. A long, long time ago, thousands of years really, we dwarves emerged from the earth where the Titans put us. Back then we were called Earthen, or so some of the hieroglyphs we found tell us, and so in the War of the Ancients, that's who's in there. The Titans created us to watch over the realms deep within the ground. In those days, the Earthen had skin of rock, didn't need to breathe, and could tunnel around without shovels or picks. Something happened to change us, though, and turned us mortal, as we are now. Maybe it was the result of the War of the Ancients. We'll probably never know for sure. We do know for sure it was the curse of flesh, and we've talked about it on other episodes. And they also are kind of, you would expect more of a presence in places like Deepholm, if this is quite true. In any case, we emerged into the world and wandered about searching for a home. Our time in service to the Titans was over, so now we needed something new to do. We called the mountainous land we discovered Modan, which means Mountain of Khaz in the ancient tongue. Why? Well, we only recently found this out. There was a Titan smith called Khaz the Shaper, who assisted in the construction of Uldaman, and perhaps the dwarven race. His name was one that we found on one of Uldaman's ancient artifacts. Even in ancient times, someone left clues that we were Titan-born, as if they knew we would forget, which we did, but we're remembering it, if slowly. I think that's interesting. Because did they keep all of these discs of knowledge, because they knew? Was there a foresight on the part of the Titans, or is that just simply part of their nature, or at least that particular Titan, to preserve knowledge, because it is important and things like this might happen? Although we were mortal and perfectly capable of living above ground, the dark places below the surface still appealed to our kind. Thus, we entered one of the great mountains to construct a great forge in honor of Khaz. This forge survives to this day, although many improvements have been made upon it over the years. The city is still named after this edifice, Ironforge. Back when we created Ironforge, we had no idea that anyone else existed in the world. We didn't even have a written language. Everything was handed down by word of mouth. Naturally, facts became legends, and legends became forgotten. The early dwarves were so busy mining and smithing their little hearts out that remembering the past just didn't seem all that important. They got very, very good at smelting ore and making things, but that was about it. However, from what we know of those early days, my people were happy. Then one day, a couple thousand years ago or so, the first humans appeared at the gates of Ironforge. We know this because human written tales of the day tell of the race of short, stocky, bearded master smiths who shared a great love of crafting and storytelling. Dwarves, they called us, and thus we are known today, even though at the time we didn't know the word literally meant diminutive. Ah, well, it could be worse. They could have called us beardmen or rockheads or something like that. Yeah, if you think about it, the race, all dwarves referring to themselves as dwarves is ridiculous. Unless that's what they've always been called, and then other races co-opted that word. If we're looking at it from like a linguistic historical perspective, etymological, maybe that word came from the fact that those races called themselves that in a fantasy setting. It was about that time that we learned about other kinds of writing because human scholars showed up to visit and take notes. What in fire's name were those little black marks they were putting on all that parchment anyway? Certainly not runic script. In any case, the humans taught us their writing, which was much simpler than runes, and over the years, so the scholars tell me, we altered their language into our own design. I don't like that. They should scratch all that, and that probably has been retconned because I think it's dumb. They clearly have had runes, which is a form of writing. I don't like all this. That's why Dwarven looks like a weird hybrid of Titan glyphs and human letters. And now that we had an easier way to read and write, the skill spread beyond just the scribes all the way down to the common folk. That's when we started writing down histories and stories, so most of our knowledge of Ironforge stems from that point. Most of what our early historians wrote down was sales dockets, crafting schematics, and other meaningless drivel I won't bore you with. There was one major event of shattering import, though, and that was the War of the Three Hammers. Here's what happened in those days, about 250 years ago. Ironforge was a mighty city carved into a tremendous mountain, but it had its limits. By then, we dwarves had multiplied a bit too much for our own good. These were the days of King Anvilmar, a good and wise dwarf who did his best to keep the peace. Population was an issue, though, and some clans chose to live outside the main confines of the city. The Bronzebeard clan, with the closest ties to the king by blood and history, occupied the prime real estate within Ironforge. The Wildhammer clan lived outside in the foothills and crags at the base of the peak, and we'll talk about that next time. And then there was the Dark Iron clan, which dwelt in the darkest recesses beneath the city. I bet you we're going to get that faction a little bit later. Maybe the next chapter. However, eventually all three clans wanted to control Ironforge, and when Anvilmar finally died, the tenuous peace fell apart. A great civil war erupted, the War of the Three Hammers. Glorious it was, or so the histories say. Eventually, the Bronzebeard clan was victorious, exiling both other clans from Ironforge. The Wildhammers were content to go their own way, conceding an honorable defeat, and founded a new kingdom in the peak of Grim Batal. The Dark Irons, however, were resentful. They established a stronghold at Thaurissen, named after their vile leader, and occupied themselves in forming a new army capable of claiming all Khaz Modan as their own. Some years later, they struck, assuming probably correctly that the Wildhammers would come to the aid of Ironforge. The Dark Irons assaulted both strongholds. The Dark Iron dwarves controlled wicked sorceress forces and set them upon both cities. Although the surprise and ferocity of the attack nearly wrecked defenders in both cities, the Bronzebeard clan rallied to drive back the invaders. The Dark Irons retreated to Thaurissen to await support from their victorious forces at the Wildhammer capital, for Grim Batal was perceived to be an easy target. Okay. We do kind of know this, and so far it's checking out. But pause. We're going to do an aside really quick, a little flavor text story about some people visiting the Ironforge. The 6 humans paused at the gates of the great mountain, staring up in awe at what greeted them. A massive stone statue nearly 100 feet high. The dwarf depicted there wore intricate chain armor and held 2 great hammers on high. His mouth was open in a soundless battle cry. "Visitors, are ya?" came a voice near them. All 6 turned to see a middle-aged dwarf, his salt and pepper beard bound in 3 body-length tresses. "Yes, course you are. Welcome to Ironforge." One of the humans, a tall man with virtually no hair at all, stepped forward and smiled. "I'm Cabon Tyran," he told the dwarf, reaching out an open hand. "Ah, yes, the handshake." The dwarf chuckled and took the hand in his, shaking vigorously. "I'm Grondor Glitterscreen. What brings you to our fine city under the mountain?" "Well," said Cabon, "we have some wares to sell. Can you direct me to the market?" Sure, Grondor answered, turning to face the statue. To either side, corridors led deeper into Ironforge. What you do is take the left-hand passage here. Go down 4 intersections. Take the stairs to the 6th dip. Turn left, then right. Go straight for 500 yards. Take the next right. Go downstairs and follow the crowd of shoppers. You can't miss it. Right, Cameron muttered. I guess I got that. Is there lodging nearby? Sure. Just keep going down to the 8th dip. Then take a right. Then another right, a left, through 3 doors and up to the hotel district. Oh, yes, I see, replied the human. His mouth continued to move, wordlessly repeating the directions in a vain attempt to remember them. Thanks for your help, I guess. Anytime, said Grondor. Enjoy your stay. The group of humans moved off, carrying their wares into the gloomy interior of the mountain and muttering among themselves, trying to remember where they were supposed to go. Grondor watched them go, a grin growing steadily on his lips. Only when he was sure they were out of hearing range did he allow himself to chuckle. Tourists. Okay, back to the main part. Indeed, the gates of Grimbatal had fallen, but the mighty hero Cardros Wildhammer waded through the attackers to slay the Sorcerer Queen, leading the Dark Invasion. The Wildhammers drove the Dark Irons back in fury, crushing them against the Ironforge army that had come to aid the defense of Grimbatal. This sealed the long-standing friendship of the Bronzebeard and Wildhammers. Both armies turned south to destroy Thaurissan and end the Dark Iron threat for all time. But the Dark Iron leader, in his anger, called forth Ragnaros the Fire Lord from his elemental prison. The Red Ridge Mountains were shattered, and Blackrock Mountain arose from the deep lava beneath the ground. So we'll have to see about the shattering of Red Ridge. We're in it right now on Classic, so let's see how the stories go there. The Dwarven armies retreated, unwilling to face the wrath of Ragnaros, while the Dark Irons were bound and enslaved to the will of the Fire Lord. Ironforge was rebuilt, but Grimbatal, corrupted by the dark forces unleashed in the war, was uninhabitable. The Wildhammers were invited to live in Ironforge, but King Cardros refused, not willing to relive the shadows of the past. Instead, he founded a new kingdom at Airy Peak, where his people remained on the surface, eventually bonding with the world of nature around them. To keep the nations close, the Ironforge Dwarfs constructed the Thandal Span, but eventually the gulf between our peoples widened. Today, the Ironforge and Wildhammer Dwarves are but distant cousins, alike only in the fact that both are of the Dwarven race. Since those days, Ironforge Dwarves have been involved in many wars, but the city has remained a rock of stability. No other threats, internal or external, have threatened it. I'm sure that's part of the reason so many of us are now seized with wanderlust. For someone like me, it's a damn boring place these days. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Ironforge Dwarf culture. Ironforge is a city built around the Great Forge, and when I say built around, I mean exactly what I say. The Great Forge dominates the center of town. Sorry, guys, the dog just won't quit. I'm trying to distract him, but he's just like I've said on previous episodes. When he gets in one of these moods, he just wants to play, and he'll. Lately, it used to be like 5-10 minutes, and then he'd calm down. But the past couple times, it's like he'll run for the entire episode. But yeah, we're working on it. I'm gonna. It's on my radar to be moving, uprooting this. I just need to figure out the logistics of picking up and moving my studio here. So the main thing that's holding me back is I like to have this computer near my other desktop, because then when my wife and I play together, we can like basically be sitting side by side while we play. So I want to keep that setup going, which if I move this into a back room, I wouldn't be able to do that. And if I got it, and I could get another computer, but then I would be tossed between, do I keep this one as a good computer? Because my other one is, obviously if I got a new one, this one that I'm using now would become the medium, wouldn't be the best computer anymore. If I'm going to buy a new one, I would upgrade. And this one's already very good, but if I upgraded, then I would want to continue to make my videos on a good computer. So I could either make this computer like my recording computer, which is fine. It obviously can do the job. And then, but that would mean my wife's computer would stay the worst computer. Or if I bumped this one down, then it would be the worst computer that moved into the room. Or I could just keep this out here as my play, and then the best computer would be the recording computer, but then it would be tucked away, and I would use it mostly just for recording. So deciding what's the best of those options. Also, it's buying a computer to upgrade over. This one would probably be $5 or $6 grand, I'm imagining. So it's not like a nothing investment. I'd have to, decide I'm going to bite the bullet and do that. Anyhow, it's on the radar. It's something I'm contemplating and doing. Yeah, the only other option would be if I moved both computers back out, and then if I back into a back room, which is okay too. Yeah, so there's options. So I'm working my way through it. Anyway, sorry. Back to the culture of the Ironforge Dwarves. So when he says built around, he means exactly what he says. The Great Forge dominates the center of the town, with everything else spreading out in concentric rings. Molten steel pours down, bathing the area in a refreshing orange glow that makes one really feel at home. Well, a dwarf sure does anyway. There's no day or night under the earth. Those folks who live above ground cycle their days by whether or not the sun is in the sky. Well, that's not how it is for us. We have what we call shifts, each of which lasts 8 hours. There are 3 per day, naturally. Back before we cared about the turning of the sun, shifts used to go 10 hours, but now that the dwarves are part of the alliance, we've matched the 24-hour day the rest of them observe. Okay. It's kind of weird, but it makes me think of like the Drow elves on Dungeons and Dragons. Although they at least use this giant phosphorescent like stalactite to mark the days. The first shift starts at midnight. There's a loud whistle from the steam-powered horns. There you go. Situated throughout the city, and everyone on first shift gets to work. 8 hours later, the horn sounds again, ending first shift and starting second. The same thing happens again for third shift. Of course, there are some services that don't use the shift schedule, police, for example, and certain kinds of craftsmen, but for the most part, an Ironforge Dwarf's life revolves around those daily whistles. Because of the 3-shift system, Ironforge runs around the clock. Unlike Theramore, which bustles in the day and virtually shuts down at night, Ironforge is always open. You don't often see stores closed in Ironforge either unless they're small shops. Someone's always there working and running the place. The first time I went to a city outside our lands, I was baffled by the closed sign in the armorer's window. At first I thought this must be counterproductive, but after some comparisons, I figured out that the output is about the same. We just do things a bit differently, that's all. Yeah, I mean, if you think about Stormwind, there's no closed sign on any of those either. Ironforge is to non-dwarves a fairly dark and forbidding place. We have lights inside, but they're kept comparatively dim. Walking around in Ironforge is like moving around outdoors, say mid-dusk. Some visitors prefer to bring their own light sources, which might draw some amused stares. We dwarves are a practical people. You don't see a lot of useless decorations cluttering up Ironforge. There aren't any parks or amusement centers unless you count one of the many taverns. We do have statues, but of course each of those honors some great dwarf hero of the past. The mighty statue of King Anvilmar at the city gates, for example. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. If not, go take a look at it sometime. Hundreds of years old and it's still in perfect condition. Marvelous. You might think that all the Ironforge dwarves do is make armor and weapons all the time. Well, yes, we love to make things out of metal, but that's not all we do. Dwarf craftsmen can make a wide variety of useful things. We love to create, after all. Give us leather, we make shoes or belts. Cloth, and we craft clothing and cloaks. Meat, and we make outstanding stews and broth. Grain, and you get alcohol. Gems, and you have jewelry. And of course, ore turns into steel, and steel into weapons and machinery. Not just for war, either. Our tinkers have created some amazing gadgets, rivaling even the gnomes for sheer inventiveness. What do we do in our off time? Yes, of course, we drink a lot. We can hold it better than anyone else, Night Elf Druids notwithstanding. Weird flex, bro. Though far better, but we don't just drink. We also have contests, usually revolving around warfare. Marksmanship contests, sparring, jousting, gladiatorial combat. You name it, we do it, but we also play other games too. team and individual sports, as well as a wide variety of board games. Some are even imports from human cities, but for the most part, we play our own creations. There's this one, for example, where you pretend to be somebody else in a kind of ongoing interactive story. I have to admit, I don't really understand that one at all. There's also a good one called Settlers of Modan. Ha ha ha. Anyway, stop in at a tavern sometime and look beyond the bar fights and laughing drunks. You'll be surprised at what's being played over in the corners and back rooms. Finally, one other thing you should know about, especially if you ever visit Ironforge. Since the War of the Three Hammers, there hasn't been a real conflict in the city. It's not allowed. Crime is strictly controlled. We have some of the best guardsmen in the world, and the penalties for thievery and other crimes are harsh indeed. Dwarven law is complex, but justice is swift. If you get caught and convicted, the best you can hope for is to get kicked out of the city. You don't get any warnings or second chances either. Break the law, you get punished. Travelers to Ironforge are well advised to read up on the rules before you get yourselves into trouble. And here's the Ironforge Dwarf knowledge that what you know about dwarf history and culture depends on your intelligence and training, which the knowledge check represents. A hero who makes an appropriate knowledge check knows the following information about Ironforge dwarves. So pretty much any hero and most people with geographic or local knowledge know that Ironforge dwarves are staunch members of the Alliance. Their homeland is Ironforge in Khaz, and the same level of local knowledge or nobility and royalty knowledge will tell you that King Magni Bronzebeard rules the Ironforge dwarves. Okay, a decent chunk of regular people and about half adventurers with knowledge of local or planar knowledge know that Ironforge dwarves are related to the Titans. They believe that the Titans created them, and this connection infuses their culture with new purpose and also allows them to turn their skin to stone for brief periods. Okay, and a few people, and a pretty solid chunk of adventurers with knowledge of history or local affairs know that Ironforge dwarves, Wildhammer dwarves, and Dark Iron dwarves were once the same people. And finally, historians know, or a few adventurers know, that in the War of the Three Hammers 250 years ago, the Dark Irons and Wildhammers split from Ironforge. And the Wildhammer dwarves are what we're going to read about next time. But for now, we have another episode in the pipe, 5x5. I thank you so much for your patience. I thank you for your listening attention, and I hope that you enjoyed the words that we got, if not the audio pollution that we have there going on. Well, we'll get there one by one. You know, we're 1,000 episodes in. Give me another 1,000. We'll get there. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.